Welcome back. So we are continuing with Vygotsky. We are at part 2, and we left off right here. So we had already seen the fact that Vygotsky studied the role of culture, social learning, as well as looking at the importance of play. So our fourth main idea is language. And I think you recall that Piaget talked a little bit about language as well, talking about its relation with symbolic thought, for instance. Well, Vygotsky looked at the way that language helped us to interact with one another. So language is the method that is used to share knowledge. If Vygotsky's idea of how we create knowledge is by talking to one another, by sharing our ideas, well, language is the vehicle through which we learn. So you can see it plays a much more integral role here than perhaps in Piaget's theory. He also talked about how we use language to help us with problem solving, with guiding our behavior. Here are a couple of interesting examples I saw. So this is from a great Facebook site called Mrs. Russell's Room. And here I love where she says one of the best things about watching kids learn is listening to them talk to each other about content. When you have students in their small groups and they're sharing and they're talking, that's not time to go sit back at your desk. It's time to walk around and engage and listen. Here's a really cool way to incorporate interaction into a subject like math. So after going over the problems, have them sit together, whether it's in groups or in pairs, and talk and share to help them learn. Now, language can be looked at in another way. So that's language between one or more people. Vygotsky also studied something called inner speech, the voice inside your head where you talk to yourself. Now, Piaget felt that inner speech was mainly a sign of egocentrism. Vygotsky felt it was much more than that. He felt that it was an important function in our cognitive development, that it played an important role in helping us to grow. So here's just, for instance, an article I saw from the Child Mind Institute, where they were talking about inner speech. And in this article, it talks about how inner speech is different from the communication we have with another person, how it is much faster than regular communication, and how it's not necessarily in full sentences because we're talking to ourselves, so we already in many ways know what we mean, so we can speak more briefly. Can you think of a time that you have used self-talk to help yourself work through a difficult problem? Any examples on that? Well, you might think of little things that perhaps you've learned in school. Like, for instance, when you were learning the planets, you might have learned my very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas to help remember the order of the planets. Now, that is also an example of a mnemonic, which we will cover in our chapter on information processing theory. But little tricks like that, when you're sitting down to take those tests, you're using that self-talk to help you recall that information. That's just one small example. With inner and private speech, he also talked about how it was helpful when you're doing something difficult and you've made a mistake and you're trying to figure out where to go next or what you've learned from your mistake. A lot of that stuff you don't speak out loud. It's all happening in your head, and you're thinking, darn it, I can't believe I messed up, and what do I need to do next time so that won't happen again? There's a lot that we do inside the confines of our brain to help us to think through things and to guide us. Also, studies have found that children who use inner speech, who really utilize it to help guide them, they tend to have better social skills. They have a better time with paying attention, and they're better at self-correcting, of changing their behavior to improve their behavior, especially after a mistake or a misbehavior. So here's just one little example. This is from Full House. This is when Michelle kind of has her inner voice, her devil and her angel side. And when she's going through something challenging, that she's using this to help guide her behavior and figure out who to listen to. When you're thinking about that angel and devil on your shoulder, that might be one interpretation of inner speech. Now, Freud would explain it differently, but that's a whole nother story. All right, so here's a short video. Just to give you some example within the realm of inner speech.
children start to converse with themselves. Using this private speech, children guide and direct their own behaviors, in much the same way they received assistance from others. Let's listen in as these first graders use private speech while working on a math problem.
Now, even though they're vocalizing, they're not talking to one another. They are still engaging in inner speech. They just happen to also be saying it out loud. Now, our next big idea is called the zone of proximal development, which is also abbreviated, as you can see, ZPD. This one is a bit more complex, so let's take a look at what this is. But although I'm saying it's complex, you will find this is extremely relevant to us as teachers. So this is based on the idea that as teachers, we want to make sure that we are appropriately challenging our students, right? I mean, we don't want our lessons to be way over our students' heads, and we also don't want them to be so simple that our students are bored. So finding this sweet spot, this area of appropriate challenge, is called the zone of proximal development. So when challenge is too high, you might feel like this little kid here, looking up the board and thinking there's no way I can do that. And below is a more lighthearted example from Family Guy.
Chris, the way to eat an Oreo is to twist it, pull it apart, and lick it. Now you.
So again, that's meant to be silly, but obviously that was way too hard for Chris. All right, so the zone of proximal development. It includes tasks that are just beginning to emerge. So things that you're just starting to learn. Okay, so you haven't mastered them yet, but it's something that you are working on. Tasks, for it to be categorized as being in your zone of proximal development, it has to be too hard for you to do all by yourself. You require some sort of assistance to help you with it. So here's kind of the idea. So right here is what I can do all by myself. I don't need any help at all, and I do great on it. Here in the purple zone is what I can do if I have some sort of help or assistance. And then up here in blue is what I can't do because it's too hard for me. So this is Chris falling out of his chair over the Oreos, okay? The purple zone is the zone of proximal development, and that's where we need to try to be in our classrooms. Now, obviously this is incredibly challenging because you might have 30 students in your room, and it's going to be hard to find the correct zone for each of them, but still. I love this meme here. So it's a way of looking at Vygotsky's ZPD, and it's the idea that it's the distance between what the learner can do alone and what the learner can do with adult guidance. So as we continue, the main point here being is that it's only through challenge that you're going to see cognitive growth in your students. At least this is according to Vygotsky. Now, Piaget would say that it was disequilibrium that drives cognitive growth, but Vygotsky says it's challenge. And another important part of the ZPD is this term here, scaffolding. Scaffolding is another word for help or assistance. So scaffolding is what we need when we are in our zone of proximal development, because remember, it's too hard for you to do by yourself. You do need some form of assistance from your teacher, from adults, from whomever it is that you're working with that is able to provide that assistance. Here's a short video just showing how a teacher can do this in a classroom.
I was trying to give you this piece because I think that they might fit. This one and this one, watch. Look, oh no! Can you put it together? Oh my goodness, that's tricky. It's hard to match those colors. You got that right away. Let's see if you can find the rest of her hair. I think up. I see a teddy bear's foot in that corner. Wow, you got it. Up. I'm gonna make a pattern. This is hard to do. I'm gonna make green, orange, green, and then what should be next? Red. Are you sure? Let's check again. What color is this? Then green. And don't you think if I want to keep going, I could put another orange, and then what would be next? Green. That's right. How did you figure it out? Let's try what will go next. Let's say them out loud. Green, orange, green, orange, green. Then.
So pardon the buzzing on that video. It's from an older DVD, but in both instances, you can see how the teachers were providing the essential assistance for the students to be able to do those skills correctly. All right, so down here's another example. I saw this on a social media post. So here we have the young man who has his blocks out and he's playing with his blocks. And the teacher provided a before and after picture showing, so here's what the child can do when they're by themselves with the blocks. Here's what the child can do when they have a little bit of help. There are all kinds of scaffolding and assistance you can provide. It is kind of a broad umbrella, and just here are some examples. Giving directions to your students, modeling, which means demonstrating what it is you want them to do, providing clear criteria for success, teaching through more than one method, providing study guides, the use of organizers, and so on. So, this is connected to the zone of proximal development, but I'm still including it as a separate idea. The idea of the more knowledgeable other, which is abbreviated the MKO. So the MKO is anyone that has more knowledge than you do about a particular topic. Okay, so someone with more knowledge or ability that the learner has on a given task. Now, yes, that could be a parent. Yes, that could be a teacher. But given the right circumstances, it could be a peer, it could be an older student, and I'm sure there are many examples of children being a more knowledgeable other, of children being a more knowledgeable other to their parents with the helping them out with technology. All right, so here's a video from the Karate Kid, which really, I think, brings home this idea of how we can learn from the more knowledgeable other, how they can be teaching us lessons and skills.
I learned plenty. I learned how to sand your decks, maybe. I wash your car, paint your house, paint your fence. I learned plenty, right?
Not everything is as simple.
Oh, bullshit. I'm going home, man.
Daniel-san! Daniel-san!
What?
Come here. Show me sand floor. Sand floor. Sand floor. Big circle. Sand floor. Sand floor. Now show me wax on, wax off. Hey.
Wax on, wax off.
Wax on, wax on. Hey, wax on, hot. Wax off. Concentrate. Look at my eye. Lock a hand. Thumb inside. Wax on. Hot. Wax off. Hot. Wax on. Hot. Wax off. Hot. Show me wax on. Wax off. That! 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 Show me paint the fence. That!
Okay, so I think you can see where I'm going with that. I know that's a bit of a longer clip than I usually play. So the more knowledgeable other is anyone who obviously knows more, is able to provide us with the scaffolding and assistance to teach us something. It can be parents, it can be siblings, it can even be someone in a tutorial video. So here's one example, from Athens City Schools, where Athens High School is partnering with Ohio Health, where they're having an internship program. Well, why do we do internship programs? So students can learn from more knowledgeable others, right? here's another instance. So Columbus City Schools. So here they had current college students from Ohio State, former student athletes coming into the elementary school to promote literacy. Because here they are serving as more knowledgeable others to the younger students. And then here's one more. So here we have students from Marietta College coming to a high school on Science Day to talk with students, to conduct experiments with them, serving as those more knowledgeable others. Let's continue. All right, also, I wanted to point out that what these MKOs are doing is they're providing the scaffolding that is necessary within the zone of proximal development to help those students acquire those skills that would be too challenging for them to do otherwise, through the guiding, through the demonstrating, through the assistance. Can you think of a more knowledgeable other that has helped you learn something? Well, boy, I'm sure we can all relate to this, whether it is a teacher or a coach or a parent or an adult in your life. All right, now let's take a look at how we can apply all of this to teaching, because as I've said before, this is the crux of any theory. How can you actually use this? And there are a lot of ways you can use Vygotsky's theories. So first of all, use interactive teaching strategies. And remember I said interactive doesn't just mean hands-on, it means more than one person. That you are talking, you are sharing, you are discussing. That is what interacting is. Two heads being better than one. So, use interactive teaching strategies. Encourage self-talk when you know your students are doing something difficult. That is when self-talk is most helpful. So, whether you are teaching them mnemonics, or just explaining to them how when they're solving a math problem, they can talk themselves through the problem perhaps. That will be an assistance to them. To make sure that you're providing appropriate and sufficient scaffolding while your students are being challenged. Because as we recall, while they're being challenged, this is when they need you the most. This is when they need your guidance and your direction. So below is a clip from The Blind Side where I think you can see the student getting this from his teacher.
I don't understand it.
Yet. You don't understand it yet. How big is your head, Michael?
Big.
And what's in there?
A brain.
A brain. It's full of knowledge. Like a file cabinet with maps and shortcuts for figuring things out. You'll get there, Michael Orr, because I'm here to help you use those maps and reach your destination like Sacagawea at Lewis and Clark.
Sacagawea?
We'll get to that, and the history books have it wrong. All you need to know is I'll get you there. Do you believe me? You trust me, Michael?
Yes, Miss Sue.
Try it again. Now, what's the next one? Read that.
I think she really illustrates what I'm talking about when it comes to a combination of scaffolding and this more knowledgeable other. So making sure you're giving sufficient support while your students are struggling. Here's an interesting example and a very different one when it comes to scaffolding. So, a lot of younger students don't know how to do conflict resolution, how to handle social emotional problems. That is something you can scaffold as well. So here it says, I hurt my friend's feelings. I can apologize. And it takes you through the different steps of what you can not only say to the other person, but also think to yourself. What a great idea of scaffolding when it comes to social issues. Another thing you can do within the world of applying Vygotsky to the classroom, give students time to practice adult roles and problem solving through play. So, we've seen how play is something that is important. You can utilize play even with your older students by tapping into things like role play and problem solving. Here's an interesting example below, a government simulation. So they do a mini society, and the students make up the 3 branches of government, and they have to learn about how a bill becomes a law. Here's another one. So I found this one online on a Facebook group called Teaching Resources. And it talks about how they have a cooperative learning activity called the Fire Safety Talk Show, where students take turns playing the role of the fire marshal and being interviewed. And one more. So this one is the idea of working with older students and getting them to become a figure in the civil rights movement, to see the importance of being an activist during certain time periods. All right, another way you can work on applying Vygotsky to your classroom is to try to find more skilled peers that can act as more knowledgeable others. Peer mentoring, peer tutoring, that also taps into social constructivism as well as the MKO and scaffolding and so many of Vygotsky's ideas. You can also make sure that you're encouraging class community and teamwork for multiple reasons. One, the better your classroom community, the more comfortable your students are going to feel when it comes to sharing their ideas. And how you can use social constructivism to help students work and learn together. Now this clip below is from a sports team, but I think it still applies and is what Vygotsky was talking about. Pardon me. So here we have a clip from Remember the Titans.
You look like a bunch of 5th grade sissies after a cat fight. You got anger, that's good. You're gonna need it, son. You got aggression, that's even better. You're gonna need that too. But any little 2-year-old child can throw a fit. Football is about controlling that anger, harnessing that aggression into a team effort to achieve perfection. When you put that uniform on, that Titan uniform, you better come to work.
I think you're nothing. Nothing but a pure waste of God-given talent. You don't listen to nobody, man. You can't run over everybody in this league, and every time you do, you leave one of your teammates hanging out to dry. What was that, Ray? Whatever it is, it ain't blocking.
Give me a break.
You want a break? I'll give you a break. Me and Julius...
Wait a minute, just let them
We get to ref once, just one time. I swear to God, I'm gonna hit you so hard by the time you come to, ooh, boy, you're gonna need a new haircut. You understand me? Let's play, fellas. Campbell. Yeah, I love it. Little contact, Petey. Left side. Strong side. Left side. Left side. Left side. Left side.
So, not to get too cheesy on you, but it's a nice clip, and it just really taps into a lot of what Vygotsky's talking about in terms of giving students that active role in communicating and interacting with one another and building this community and teamwork. All right, and as we're nearing the end here with Vygotsky, you want to make sure you're providing opportunities for appropriate play. Now, we already touched on this with older students with role play, but I just wanted to reinforce this, especially with our elementary kids. Find ways to incorporate play into your everyday.
One of the things that I think we've got to be aware of when we talk about play, we're not talking about an unstructured experience. There's all kinds of things that structure that experience. The way you set out your provision, the way you resource an area, the way you provide stimulation into it, all of that frames and shapes and directs that activity. And a lot of that thinking will have gone on before the play starts, because you've created a learning environment that enables the play to happen.
So I like how they're talking about the idea of structuring your play and embedding it within what you're already doing in the classroom. So we will be wrapping up by comparing Piaget to Vygotsky, because I'm sure you've already seen many of the parallels. So let's go through them. Pardon me. let's start with our first one, and let me get my laser pointer. So when it comes to how they define learning and how learning occurs, Piaget would say it is a somewhat solitary process, that it can simply take place between an individual and objects in his or her environment. Vygotsky would say it is entirely social and is mutually built, so it is collaborative. When it comes to where they think cognitive growth comes from, what drives it, Piaget went back to the idea of cognitive conflict, and that by inducing disequilibrium, you motivate your students to be curious and to want to learn, which propels them forward. And in Vygotsky, it's more about the idea of providing appropriate challenge, and that's how they grow beyond what they already know. What teachers should do, Piaget would say, is all about providing opportunities for discovery. So give them manipulatives, give them resources, let them figure things out. Vygotsky would say provide collaborative learning, provide them opportunities to interact with one another, but also provide scaffolding. In terms of context, Piaget would say, well, you know what? Stages are the same regardless of your environment. Context doesn't really matter. We all go through stages 1 through 4. Vygotsky would say context matters greatly, and that our development will differ based upon our context or our social world or culture. And then finally on language, this one I find interesting. According to Piaget, thought is what drives language. So we develop symbolic thought, and it is evident through our speech. Vygotsky says it is through our speech that we change our mental structures and we learn. So, parallel but different. And again, that is just a reiteration, and that's it. Thank you so much for your patience and for learning with me as we go through Vygotsky, and I will see you next time. Now, for those of you who have hung with me until the very end, it is late at night at my house, and I'd like to show you that whenever I make these videos, I'm usually accompanied by at least one cat. So this one here is Lily. Who else do we have? Over here we have Nala, my feral cat that I cannot touch or pick up, but she likes to sit near me. And then last but not least, if you can see these two chilling by the fireplace. So, that's all 4 of them in one shot. Good night, and I'll see you next time. Boop.